Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Mark. As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us cross over to the other side of the lake." So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up, shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to die?" When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." Suddenly the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. Then he asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples were absolutely terrified. "Who is this man?" they asked each other. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. Do I hear music? Am I hearing music somewhere? Real faint.
No, ma'am.
Huh?
I hear.
Okay, somebody else heard it too, but I do want you to pray, sorry. I just thought, am I hearing things? But it's from outside. Okay, that's it's like our speakers aren't playing games on us.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Please rain, Lord. Thank you for this time to worship you. Protect us, Lord. Speak through Holly. Speak through her heart, because we know that you're spoken to her heart. And help us to listen. Help us to open our eyes and our minds and our hearts to hear your words. We ask this in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
I kind of put a title to the sermon. I don't always do that. But this is what I wrote down when I started to think about this week's sermon. Can you really count on God? This morning, the gospel lesson we read, Jesus is asleep in the back of the boat and a storm is raging. How often do we feel like Jesus is asleep in our boat while the storm is raging? And the disciples woke him up and said, "Teacher, don't you care we may die?" The disciples are responding to the storm as we do. "Jesus, don't you care?" The disciples are actually criticizing Jesus. He's not coming to their aid. Of course, nowhere do we hear them making a request of him until they criticize him. How many of us do the same thing? Don't we act the same way? Where are you? Don't you care? Or are we in doubt? Do we think, is he really going to rescue us this time? Is he really there for us? As you read your Bible and you look at the stories of old, some of the great saints had those same questions. Is God trustworthy? Are his promises true? That's really what we're asking them. Let's go back to the beginning. Back to Adam and Eve. A few weeks ago we talked about them. They trusted the snake more than they trusted God. If they had trusted God, they never would have eaten the fruit. What about Sarah and Abraham? God promised Abraham that he would be a father of a great nation. This is from Genesis. Then the Lord took Abram aside and said, "Look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have." Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. That sounds wonderful, doesn't it? He was righteous in the eyes of God because of his faith. Abraham believed in God's promise, but he didn't believe in God's timing. Instead, he and his wife Sarai took matters into their own hands, and Abraham had a son with Sarah's handmaiden Hagar. Because Abraham and Sarah didn't wait on the Lord's timing, we have a big storm brewing, and we're still paying for it today. God's promise did come true. Abraham and Sarah did have a son, and he was a miracle. For Sarah was beyond childbearing years. If you want to know the whole story of Abraham and Sarah, go to Genesis chapters 12 through 25. God uses storms to reveal himself to us. He uses storms to teach us. He uses storms to guide us. And he uses storms to bring us closer to him. We're going to continue our journey a little bit more in the Old Testament. We're going to look at 300 years after Abraham came a gentleman named Joseph. We all know the story of Joseph and his multicolored coat, right? I don't know if you've all seen, there's a little video out there, it's a movie actually, and Joseph and his Technicolor dream coat. Well, we put some spins on it, but this is the story of Joseph. He stayed true to God. He was sold into slavery by his brothers. He was imprisoned unjustly, but he stayed focused on God, and eventually he became second in command of Egypt. This is from the King James Version, and it's from John. These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, storms. But be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. How many of us believe that and live into it? Or are we like the disciples? We're going to drown, save us, don't you care? The more time you spend in your scriptures, you will find nowhere did God promise that there would be no storms. He did promise he would be with us in those storms. Is God in your boat? I want to get back to Joseph for a minute. His family was a bit dysfunctional, obviously, since his brothers sold him into slavery. Now, some of the storms in their life was caused by their own personal issues. Just like ourselves, some of our storms we bring on ourselves. But they had a big storm that they had no control over. There was a famine in the land. But they knew there was food in Egypt. So they went to Egypt and God saved them. God knew that there was going to be a famine long before it happened. So he made sure his servant Joseph was in the right place at the right time. How many times have we been in the right place at the right time and we're like, how did I get here? Why am I here? God knew. But do we don't always understand? We don't always have the faith to believe that. Joseph trusted God to the end. That's what it means to trust in the middle of a storm. Do you think he was a happy person being sold in slavery? Or a happy person being in prison unjustly and then being forgotten about for all those years? Probably not. But he knew God was in control. In Genesis it says, this is Joseph speaking to his brothers. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. We have to know sometimes things don't look good sometimes. But what is God saying? Is he awake in your boat? Or is he asleep and you're wondering what's going on? Have you asked him? Have you talked to him? Let's look at the story of Exodus. Joseph has taken all his family to Egypt. Over many years and centuries, they have become enslaved to Pharaoh. Now they leave They leave Egypt. Moses is leading them. They walk through the Red Sea. He leads them, the Lord leads them with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. He feeds them manna from heaven, the food of angels. He produces water out of a rock for them. They complain and he sends quail so they have meat to eat. Now you would think all these mighty acts of God, the faith of his people would be strong and unwavering. But that's not what happens. The people don't trust, they don't believe, and they grumble and complain. And so they wander for 40 years. But God hasn't abandoned them. He is still in the midst of their wandering. Now I want to jump ahead to those 12 men in the boat. Now they've been with Jesus for over a year. They have seen miracles. They have seen healings. I mean, miraculous things. He's changed water into wine. The blind see, the lame walk. But they still lack faith and they criticize Jesus, just like the children of Israel did during the time of Moses. They have forgotten the promises and they've let fear take over. When the storms come, we must trust. We must have faith. The children of Israel forget. The disciples forgot. We forget the blessings that God has provided, and all they see is the storm. Someone gave me a magnet, and it sits on my refrigerator, because guess what? I need that remembrance too. Don't tell God how big the storm is. Tell the storm how big your God is. We all do it. We're just like the children of Israel. And I know myself. Things get hard and storms of life come. But we have to keep our focus on Jesus and not on the storm. We all have them. You might not call it a storm. Maybe you call it trouble or a concern or a problem. But how do we respond? Do we look at the boat and Jesus sleeping and say, "Don't you care?" They had Jesus right in the boat with them. Nowhere did it say they gently woke him up and say, "Hey, we had a little problem here." They're criticizing God. Do we not do the same? Every Sunday, at the end of service, we give you the opportunity to share God moments. What God does in the storms of our life are those God moments. You might think, "Oh, it's not a big deal. It's not that important." It is important. We all need to hear how God blesses you to encourage us. But sometimes in the midst of the storm, we can't see Jesus. We think he's sleeping in the back of our boat. If we continue with the lesson, we know that after Jesus calms the storm, he said, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" Where was their faith? I want to bring you back to the Old Testament again. King David. Now we know King David fought Goliath. He was a young man when he did this. At this point, David has been anointed by Saul to be king of Israel. He was not king yet, but he had been anointed for that position. He remembered the promise, and God's Spirit was with him. So when David went out to meet Goliath, he wasn't fearful. He knew he would win the day because he claimed the promise of God. His promise that he would be king. Goliath would not win the day. The storm of life would not win. At the beginning of our lesson that they went over to the other side in the boat with Jesus, that was the promise. We're going to the other side. He didn't say we might make it if you row the right way. He just said we're going to the other side. That's the promise. He didn't say trip would be easy, but he did guarantee they would arrive at their destination. Most of the times when a storm is raging, how do we respond? The book of James tells us how we should respond. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, various storms, various problems. Is this how we respond? I know for myself, I have to work hard at reading troubles with joy. Doesn't mean the trouble is the joy, but the joy is the promise that Jesus is with us in the storm. David saying, give thanks to the risen Lord. That's what we are rejoicing with. That is our joy. We rejoice that God is with us. He has not abandoned us, and he does care. If we read the Gospel in Greek this morning, when Jesus says, be still, he's actually saying, be calm and remain calm. At that moment, when he says those words, the sea and the wind become calm. The disciples notice something, that their friend and their teacher has authority over nature. This is a powerful moment, and not to be looked at lightly. Do we truly believe that we worship a God that controls everything, or do we think our problems are too big or too insignificant for the God that keeps the stars in the sky to worry about those things? He does care. He loves us with such love that when we stub our toe in the middle of the night to big major problems, he walks with us. He walks in those storms. So we know he is here. I have a psalm I'm going to close with, but I'm going to let Kyle put some quiet music on as I read this. Because I know some of you have some big storms in your life right now. You've shared them with me. We have them on the prayer chain. We have them on our intercessor list for Sunday morning. But sometimes you need that personal touch, that hand holding, that hug in that storm. So as Kyle plays, I'm going to read Psalm 62, verses 5 through 8. And then I'm going to ask if anybody would like to come up for prayer. Doesn't matter what the deal is. It could be you did stub your toe in the middle of the night. Or it could be something really major. But I'm going to ask, feel free, when the time that people come forward, and myself, and anyone else who would like to come and pray with an individual. You might have a buddy next to you, would you come with me? You get something a little timid about coming forward. I get that. If you guys had seen me many years ago, I couldn't even pass the peace. That's how timid I was. And now I'm standing here. So that changes. But let's read Psalm 62, and then I'll let you guys, if you want to come forward for prayer. Let all that I am wait quietly before the Lord, for my hope is in him. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress where I will not be shaken. My victory and honor comes from God alone. He is my rock, my refuge, where no enemy can reach me. O my people, trust in him at all times. Pour out your heart to him, for God is